Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jeremy Siskin. I'm here with my good friend, Glenn Zaleski. Let's plug my books first. Playing Solo Jazz Piano, Jazz Piano Fundamentals. But we're really
I'll
here,
plug it too. I'll plug it too. I'm the owner of playing solo jazz piano,
and you appear
and
in the book. Your album,
I do, I
Solo
do.
Piano Volume 1 is mentioned.
Yes, I'm flattered. Actually, look, my book has an annotation too
Oh,
from
wow. I can't
Jeremy
really
himself.
read it, but I assume it was something very personal and heartfelt.
It
Um,
says, "Thanks for nothing."
If you're
It's a
not
great book.
familiar
Check
with
it out.
Glenn's playing, he is just one of our leading lights of jazz piano in my generation. And he's put out a beautiful new album called Solo Piano Volume 2 that just does everything I love about solo piano playing. And in fact, I have asked him here to get some tips and to listen and guide me through one of the tunes on the album. And I chose Black Orpheus because it's one of these songs that everybody knows, and it's kind of like it. I think in the jazz education world, it's in those first couple rungs of tunes that you might learn. Like it's in the first category of bossa novas because it's pretty simple. And I feel like it's just been so long since I've heard anybody play it in a way that makes me want to actually listen to the tune. um,
Uh,
so I just really appreciated somebody playing that tune with a lot of heart and color and um, genuineness instead of just kind of playing it as a real book like chart. um, and one of the things that I admire most about your playing, maybe because it's something that I struggle with, is I feel like you're able to provide like simultaneously like a clear sense of groove while providing this like clear sense of freedom. You have these long phrases, and there's not like it never locks into a rhythmic pattern, or maybe at the end it kind of locks into a little bit of a rhythmic pattern, but I never feel like it's missing groove. And like that's what I really want to try to extract out of you listening to the track with you. And maybe, do you have some initial thoughts? How do you think about creating groove in solo piano? I know some pianists like subdivide in their head or like hear the rhythm section in their head. Others maybe wouldn't want to do that. I don't know. Do you have thoughts?
well, yeah, one of the biggest things that occurred to me um, in the past 4 or 5 years, just listening to great pianists, um, was something about the way the left hand and the right hand interact. And it kind of dawned on me that, in fact, the right hand and the left hand don't need to be in the same place at all times. And I found that if I could maintain some sort of rhythmic figure in my left hand, then my right hand, I could establish a grid with a certain feeling in my left hand, but then my right hand didn't need to match that grid. In fact, my right hand could be as free as somebody singing. It actually,
Mm-hmm.
harmonically and rhythmically, it doesn't need to fit into what my left hand is playing. And that was something that uh, didn't occur to me before. And I think as I get more comfortable with that, I'm able to achieve something that maybe sounds grooving, but also kind of sounds free. And to totally oversimplify it, it's like, okay, left hand is grooving, right hand is free, which is not a new thing or a unique thing, but I think actually realizing that is very liberating when you're trying to play solo piano, or even playing in a trio. I try and find the same balance between the hands.
Right.
Um,
That's interesting because it doesn't sound to me like that's the way you're playing. Um, it, um,
well,
but I
yeah, there's
do.
different
One of the things
examples
that I
of
do hear is there's all these layers. Like
it.
there's always, not always, but there's so often two parts in the left hand, two parts in the right, and they're like it just feels like together they're kind of creating, almost like a drum set would have, cymbals, hi hat, bass, snare. Like they're creating this kind of multi-layered sense of groove,
Well,
which
I definitely am into that. I definitely think
yeah.
about the piano in layers. I always tell myself
Mm,
that, but also my students that. I always say layer number one is the melody. So really just the melody by itself should be enough. That's layer one. And then from that you add the second layer. And then if those two layers are solid, then you're you're welcome to add a third layer, I
Is the
suppose.
second layer usually the bass or?
It's usually the bass or some kind of. mm, Sometimes I think of groups of notes as one layer. Like I might think of chords. Like, of course, this is a big debate, but if I play this chord, is that four layers or is that one layer? I mean, generally, of course, there's a million ways to think of it, but sometimes I might just think of this as one layer and this as layer two, for example. Um, the piano, of course, we're playing so many notes at the same time. We have to decide what the layers are.
Right.
It
But
doesn't
one of
matter
the things
what
that
you
you do
decide.
so well, if I may, is the balance is so intentional and so good. I can hear all these little kind of thumb, like small melodies that are, contributing harmonically, though mainly in my mind, they're there to keep the rhythm. And you play them in such a beautifully understated way that that first layer, the melody, is always singing out above everything. Um,
Yeah, I'm very conscious of that, and thank you for saying and noticing that. I, of course, work on that, and I've also spent a fair amount of time practicing. I don't know if this is the Jeremy Siskin famous technique, but I've spent a fair amount of time. I associate it with you,
okay.
which is the thumb and pinky finger.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Like,
I'll take credit for that.
yeah, that thumb and pinkies is something that I've spent time practicing, and I recommend to students. And I always point to you, Jeremy,
Oh,
for
I'm honored.
that.
Yeah, just in
So
case anybody watching the video doesn't know what we're talking about, it would be taking just these four fingers and then trying to play. Is this how you do it?
yeah, exactly like that.
I want to hear some thumb and pinkies from you. I'm
Oh, that would
curious
be.
where you've taken the art form of four finger playing.
I mean, I actually. Oh, I just played my fourth finger, which. I mean, this isn't a lot different than how I
That's so
really just
good,
play the
Glenn.
tune.
That's better than
Well,
my
I
thumb and
think.
pinky.
Oh, I just cheated. I mean, a
Dude,
little bit.
but you're creating so much groove with the thumb and pinky. Mine always end up kind of sounding like chorales.
Yeah, I said, well, maybe that's, yeah, when I do thumb and pinky, I don't always think of it as just static. I do try and think of it like, like if you're playing, what is that thing, like the frame drum? Or like some kind of drum where you
Mhm.
have like two sides.
Right.
So I do think of that. Or like sometimes I practice subdivisions, like tapping on my knees or my chest. And then try and feel that instead of feeling subdivisions here, I feel one set of subdivisions here and another set of subdivisions here. So then I have
Right. But then what makes
something
it
very.
so interesting to me is it doesn't come off as like, right, of course,
Yeah.
as but you have so many little threes and fives, and like the patterns within create this arc that doesn't, like it never feels like it's grounded to the 4/4 time in,
Mhm.
a like in a boxy way. Like it always feels like there's these long melodic phrases. So to me, that's like the magic of what you're doing is you have this going on, but it feels like that, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, that's definitely. I mean, that's a goal, and I thank you for saying that. I'm working hard to achieve that. Um, yeah, I think a lot of it also is the piano is left to its own devices. The piano is a pretty boxy and dry instrument, but if you kind of use the pedal in a tricky way, then you can make notes kind of sing more than they would on their own. So I think when I'm doing thumb and pinky, I'm very conscious of how I use the pedal as well
Mm,
to make sure it's not over pedaled but not under pedaled. Like I think when I'm playing, I want to use the pedal a lot, but I don't want people to think I'm using the pedal at all.
mm.
I want it to be like a trick. Um, and if I do that, I can make the piano more alive than it might be just left to its own kind of button pushing
And can you
device.
give us any hints about what the trick is? Is it pedaling more melody notes rather than bass notes? Is it changing the pedal a lot?
Oh yeah, sometimes I mean I might change the pedal on every melody note. Blah, 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 blah.
That's cool.
I mean, actually no, I would totally do that. I'm not doing it. You know what? I'm not doing just thumb and pinky. I'm going to abandon
Yeah,
thumb and
that's okay.
pinky. Yeah, I'm very aware of the dynamics. I'm definitely trying to keep the melody louder, and I'm trying to keep everything. And I wasn't really thinking of that in 4 layers. I was kind of thinking of it in 2 layers, whereas
Oh,
the melody
interesting.
was, yeah. That's just, I mean, I suppose that's maybe just semantics. Like, is was that 3 layers or is that 2 layers? Like, I think I could think of that as 1 layer, and this as another layer, and this is the third layer. But for me, that would be too what's the word? Too fragmented. I'm trying to defrag. I'm trying to think of just as few parts as possible, actually. So, two. Generally, what I just played, I thought of in 2 parts, just because it's easier for me to wrap my head around.
So, yeah, that's interesting because
About
usually I
two
think of the
parts.
bass as different parts, and then like to me, one of the beauties of the thumb and pinky exercise is to think of it in 4 parts. So
I know.
that's
Well,
interesting that you like that exercise, but you're trying to defragment.
yeah. It's just semantics because okay, like I could do thumb and pinky. I'm not really thinking of that in four. I can't think of that in 4, even though if somebody wanted to, it's because I'm doing thumb and pinky. It's definitely 4 because it's only 4 mallets, as it were.
Right.
But I can't. I don't think of it that way because it's just semantics, really. But I try and think about as few things as possible.
Right. And then
For
uh there's the one moment in which is just so like pianistically to nerd out about. There's the one moment where you play the bass.
oh yeah, yeah.
Which I totally hear that in 3 part because it's like a repeated bass melody and then kind of this arpeggiated
Well,
thing.
that was 3 part. That was 3. That was
That's
3.
that's
I've been
3.
working on that for a long time. I'm still not quite as good at that as I'd like to be, but a few times on this record, I did put some thumb, left hand thumb melodies because I think that's
Yeah.
a great, especially when you have an out. You play the melody and then you blow for a while, and then you have the out head, and doing a thumb melody is like a great way to keep interest going because if you've had the same orchestration for the head and the solo, then if you can manage to put the melody in your thumb and do some stuff up here, then it's just a way to keep interest in what you're playing. Uh,
Yeah, and what
it's
interested
also
me about that
very
part, I mean, a lot interested me about that part, but you played such interesting rhythms in your left hand pinky. Like it wasn't just, if I were trying to do that, I'd be like, I mean, first it was cool to like do a pedal instead of trying. Like I think the pedal was really nice, but you played like all these
yeah.
kind of interesting rhythms. Was there like intent behind that, or? Um,
Well, I don't really remember, but I do
yeah,
think that I might. Oh, see, I didn't like the way I just played that. I kind of thwacked it, right? Sometimes I might just think about like now I'm just playing chords, right? Wow, that was a funny chord. Yeah, something like that. So it wasn't really like a melody in a single note. Sometimes I'll just use the rest of my fingers in my left hand to play a chord, and
Yeah, and you're not that worried about the root being in the bass. It sounds like you're very happy to play an inversion.
Oh yeah, I definitely was not worried about doing the root. Although another thing that I like to do occasionally on this record, which is going to be hard to demonstrate on this piano because I don't have a proper middle pedal, but I have something that resembles a middle pedal. So I can, if I play a note down here, catch it with the middle pedal. Now I'll change. I mean, I'm kind of screwing up, but that way you can
It's fancy,
have
man.
a pedal. It's fancy. The middle pedal is fancy, and I've begun to experiment with it. I think it's a handy trick. Um,
Do you
and
know?
that way,
So, I mean, I know like Rand Blake is somebody pretty famous for using the middle pedal. Do you know
mm.
of other pianists who definitely use the middle
Oh
pedal?
yeah, yep. Sullivan Fortner uses a lot of middle pedal,
Oh,
and he uses
interesting.
it in such a way that like if you're not listening closely, you're not even going to notice that he's using it. But he's using it, and there's this. I see him live whenever I can, and I notice it. But also, there was this video of him playing El Grande Amor, and it's just so much middle pedal, but in
Hmm.
such a clever way that if you're not listening carefully, you're not even going to notice, which I think is the best way. Like this way of using the middle pedal is pretty obvious. Um, Not that that makes it. I mean, it's still cool, but it's
Yeah,
kind of bland. But yeah, I've heard him use it.
Sullivan.
And,
Okay.
and of course Brad uses the middle pedal.
Oh, interesting.
Um, yeah,
Huh.
but I feel like Brad didn't use it like he wasn't using it on. I don't know if he was using it on like Live at Tokyo, for example, but
Uh-huh.
I think now, like whatever, 20 years later, I've heard him use it live when I've seen him play solo, and also even on this Seymour Reed's The Constitution album, and he has this epic piano interlude on his song called Ten Tune, and he just like takes off into this crazy, amazing stuff. But he uses a fair amount, some middle pedal there. Um, that's about
Can
all
I
I can
ask you
think
about
of. Yeah,
the?
Rand
Oh,
uses it.
sorry. Yeah,
Oh,
that's the
that's okay.
guy who I've seen like use it in such interesting ways, and like pretty obviously, he's using it as an effect. Can I
Yeah.
ask you about your right hand stuff you were doing? It sounds so like Chopin or Rachmaninoff. Like it like.
Oh yeah.
Are you thinking of anything specific? It seems like there's a lot of sixths in there.
Well, I love that
It's also
stuff.
very bratty.
Brad. So Brad, which of course, those sorts of. I mean, I don't know if he would do D7, but
And so what you're thinking of is alternating between
I don't want to do
a
that.
single note and a dyad. Like,
Yeah. So that one in particular, Brad would do that a lot. So I mean,
yeah.
I don't want to overdo that because I think it like. But for me, actually, all this stuff really comes from. I mean, you mentioned Chopin, and I'm a Chopin lover. I'm not a very good Chopin player, but I'm a Chopin practicer and lover, and of course. I mean, that's enough of that. I'm not going to play it anymore. I'm still working on it. But that I think is the first time that I encountered that sort of texture, and it's very very useful. Yeah, single note and a dyad, but then also like you can close it. So yeah, you could do it too. Like if I saw this F minor, that kind of thing. Two. That's like 2. 1. Or I could turn that into a 3 by going like this, which of course is not very different from. That's the 3, but you could like. So then it could become rhythmic because if you take this shape, but if you do 2s and 3s.
Right, but you can make a hemiola if you play it in like eighth notes, something like that. Right,
Yeah,
that's
I
the
think
really
that's
blocky version.
but I think maybe that's good. Yeah, because if you do hemiola, so eighth notes, but in groups of three. So one,
Right,
two, three, four, one, two, three,
right.
like that.
Yeah,
I do
or like
find
alternate and create a group of five or something, you know.
alternating create. I think if I'll be better at it someday, but I think you could ideally alternate between groups of twos and threes, and it could be a rhythmic entity as well as like a harmonic effect, which I
Yeah.
think is pretty cool.
All right. I've got one more question and then I'm going to let you go. Okay. Can I ask you one more thing that like fascinates me
Yeah.
about solo pianists? And I think maybe having the overhead cam like accentuates this, but I'm really fascinated ever since I like looked over Fred Hirsch's solo or looked over his shoulder as he was playing solo. I was fascinated by how frequently his hands were like changing spots on the piano. And as I look at your overhead camera, I'm noticing something, similar, that you will camp out for a second, and but then you'll very much drop down. There's kind of constant motion between octaves, and even you're playing the melody in like different octaves for different phrases. Like, so I guess my question is that something that you think about? Is that something that you practice? Is that something that you've already said a couple of times that you're like into variety, that as you prepare a solo piece, you're trying to make different textures. And I did notice that, like, I think your first chorus of solo on Black Orpheus, you go up to the upper range of the piano and like leave the bass out completely. But how much are you
That's
thinking
good.
about, like trying to move from one area to the next?
I'm very very conscious of it. Very conscious of if I just played the whole melody and I was just down here. Now what I might want to do to give myself an advantage. Yeah, when you move yourself up there, just the change of orchestration gives you a little bit of an advantage. When I say advantage, it changes it up a little bit. So I do think about, are my hands here? Are my hands here? Are my hands here? Because there's not actually that many options, right? I can be here, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's not that many. So if I find myself here all the time, then maybe that's,
That's going to get old pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it for a while,
Yeah.
but occasionally you might want to get down here. And I do think about that. Actually, I think one of the biggest differences maybe between volume 1 of this solo experiment of mine and volume 2 is that in volume 1 I was definitely a lot more, I wasn't as comfortable jumping around. And I wouldn't say I'm comfortable jumping, but I'm definitely more aware of using broader ranges on the piano. But I think it's more aware of broader ranges, not to always be going like this, but because jumping around is only effective if you stay in one place for a while. Like, so if I stayed here for 2 minutes, so I want to be able to stay here for a few minutes. Now if I go here, now I'm going to stay here for a few minutes, for example. So it's like if I always stayed in one place, it wouldn't be good. But if I always moved around, that wouldn't be good either. It's a balance of all of those parts. So I do think about that very very consciously.
Yeah.
One more thing I should say: it's great that you mentioned Fred Hurst because of course we're both of us are admirers of Fred. And the reason why I played this tune, or why this tune has always been on my mind, is the very first time I had a piano lesson with Fred was when I was going to school in Stockton, California, at the Brubeck Institute. Fred was a guest artist. Um, I actually, I never really like studied regularly with Fred, but I had uh, four incredible piano lessons, and this very first one was in Stockton, and I was playing the piano, and he was sitting there, and he asked me to play a slow bossa, and I was like, okay, so I played How Insensitive, and I gave it my best shot.
Mhm.
I gave it my best shot. It was probably not great playing, probably not. It wasn't great.
It's
And
not up to Fred
needless
Hurst
to say,
level.
yeah, and needless to say, it got a lot faster by the time I was done. And Fred said, you're a lot faster now than when you started.
Mm.
And then he sat down at the piano and started to play. He started to play How Insensitive, but then he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to play a different tune because I don't want to play that anymore." And what tune did he play? Black Orpheus
Mm.
as a slow bossa. I don't remember what key, but and he played Black Orpheus at the piano, and I stood, I was looking over his shoulder. He just played it for like 5 minutes, and that was the best.
That
That was
life changing,
one of the
right?
best things I ever had. Oh yeah, it was. It was just like, oh well, that's like every second was like, oh wow, that's yeah. It was before the era where like people were filming everything,
Uh-huh.
and part of me thinks like, oh, it would have been cool if I had a video of it. But also, I'm glad that I didn't because it was just there, like it just happened. And I just
Yeah.
stood over his shoulder and I absorbed it, and I have an impression of it, and it kind of set me on a whole new direction. Just watching him
Yeah.
kind of play and meditate on this tune, and that's why it's
I
been in
can
my
relate to that very strongly.
yeah, yeah, right. I think if there's a lot of pianists, I hope that have gotten to study with him and had that experience. But that's why this tune has been in my repertoire as this kind of meditative, slow bossa. So
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Glenn, just thank you so much for spending the time to let me nerd out on how I'm enjoying the album and ask you some questions and figure out where you're at. You want to plug your stuff one more time before we
well,
keep going?
yeah. You can find Solo Volume 2 anywhere that albums are streaming. This is a digital only album, so there's no hard copies for now, but it's streaming everywhere. And if you want to support, you can find it on Bandcamp. And also for a lot more stuff like this, videos and discussions and live streams, you can find me on Patreon.
And is the best way to just search Glenn Zaleski Patreon? I can put a link in the YouTube comments too.
Yeah, Glenn Zaleski Patreon, or I think it's patreon.com/Glenn Zaleski.
Great. Well, Glenn, thank you so much. This has been so fun.
Thank you. What a thrill. I'm so happy. I'm a big fan of Jeremy's channel. I'm Jeremy. I'm a big fan of your channel, but to the people watching, I'm a big fan of Jeremy's channel. I'm a loyal subscriber. I can't say I've watched all the videos because there's hours and hours and hours
How could
of
you?
stuff. I've been very inspired by many of the videos and many of the high quality content that Jeremy's putting out there. So thanks for that, Jeremy. And
Thank
check
you.
it out. Hit the subscribe button.
Mash that subscribe
Cost you
button.
anything.
How far we've fallen. All
Yeah, I shouldn't have
right.
said that. Edit that out. Wait, there's no editing in these.
There's no
videos, by the way.
edits.
This is raw, uncut. You know.
This is the real us, for better or for worse. All right, I'm hitting the stop button.
Okay.